Welcome to Mutually Assured Conversation. I'm here with Bethany Tabor. I kind of know you, Bethany, as a sort of sane astrology person, which is why I wanted to speak to you today, because I think that my position is more skeptical, but I don't think that's because of a reflective opinion of mine. I think I've just gotten that from osmosis from society in general, from the intellectual zeitgeist. So kind of before we jump into some stuff, I mean, like I said, I know you as the same astrology person, but how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, I define myself as a historian first, and astrologer second. But maybe that's just because, that's I'm trained as an art historian, and work in the Department of Culture. Arts and culture is sort of my professional day job. And astrology, I've been studying it for about 7 years now. And so I still consider myself a little bit of a novice, but they actually overlap quite a bit. There's a practice of astrology, or a sect, a discipline of astrology called mundane astrology, which is the astrology of global events. And so what you're doing is specifically looking at the outer planets, so Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Those are the slower, they take a longer time to orbit around the solar system. And so they have a stronger impact on generations, and they have a stronger impact on macro level events. And so that when you're studying mundane astrology and you're trying to compare transits that are coming down the pike or transits that are happening now, and you compare that to transits that happened, you're looking at 250 years prior. And so that's where the history and astrology sort of intersect for me. And so, I historian and astrologer are my two definitions.
Yeah, so some interesting stuff off the back of that is when you say study, like, I mean, I consider myself as studying philosophy, but I've done that in a academic context before. And I think for the last couple of years, I've been doing it kind of independently. Like, when you say studying astrology, what do you mean by that? How does one study astrology?
So there's you have to be very self-motivating, obviously. Like it's inherently an independent study, but then also you have to be very vigilant. Astrology did explode on social media over the last 10 or so years. I mean, it's been brewing, and astrology has had its new age sort of renaissance for the last 50 years. But on social media, there are tons of people who are offering classes and workshops, tons of astrologers who are offering classes and workshops. You have to be very vigilant to you have to go into that, I think, with a little bit of background knowledge for yourself. Like I've read books about Hellenistic astrology, which is the tradition of antiquity. And that having that read material sort of sets me up to also vet astrologers who are on the internet and understand who is just scamming and who is, someone really worth their salt. And I usually take workshops with people who seem really in it and good. I've been studying with two people pretty consistently over the last 3 years, Olivia Pepper and Charlie Cross. They're two astrologers who I deeply trust. And they also make astrology a little bit, they educate in the way of myth as well, which I think is really, really important. And that might be why you describe me as a sane astrologer too, because I think that there's mythology and archetypal trends that have persisted across millennia, and to make astrology all about personalities, as many internet astrologers do nowadays, is just not that's not it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, various levels of this, but other things with a spiritual edge, so I would say various religions, is for whatever reason, it's very prone to people coming in and sort of relying on that spiritual edge from people, because religions suffer from cults in a way that I think likely astrology does as well. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because Well, and that's what you saw with the New Age coming out of the 1960s,
Right.
70s
Mhm.
is, yeah, a lot of like weird cults and occultists and stuff. I mean, that's been plaguing the whole 20th century. Is like you can go down a rabbit hole in one particular area of study, and then just like and decide and people just decide that they take their entire directive for life from that one rabbit hole. Um you have to broaden your scope and make sure that you're not just going too deep on one thing. You have to keep it broad. That's also kind of why I like astrology too, is because it satisfies this my like easily distractible brain,
Mhm.
and I don't have to like specialize in one particular thing. Because once you get too specialized, obviously, like your whole worldview shrinks. You become very myopic. Um, but and the other thing too is that I think is interesting about the New Age spirituality part of astrology is they in the 1960s, those people who were engaging in that kind of revival, they seem to forget that astrology is about looking at the stars, at like
Mhm.
actually just observing the cycles of the stars. I mean, in antiquity, astronomy and astrology were the same thing. It was one and the same. And Galileo, Kepler, these astronomers were sort of astrologers first and foremost, because that was their worldview, and so they had this like pantheon of spirits in their mind, and that was how they defined everything. But they were observing, and they were engaged in geometry, the math, like it's about observing the cycles first and foremost. And I think that is like very something that is very lost in the New Age spirituality.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we should kind of hang on to for the rest of this conversation, because one of the things
Mhm.
I wanted to compare it to was, the so-called empirical sciences, right? So, and maybe the cult of scientism as well. But
Mhm.
one thing to kind of recognize here is that, you know, astrology is, I mean, in its proper context, by the sounds of things, is based on empiricism as much as a science would be.
Yeah. And yeah, it is, because it's all about what you making the association. It's you see something happening, and that is real. I mean, I think about one of the first sort of but astrological outlooks, I guess, in very ancient times was civilizations observing the eclipses, the solar and lunar eclipses. And that was massive because it was terrifying. It was a horrifying thing to look at, to see the sun blotted out and didn't know what was happening. They understood it as like a very negative omen. Specifically, they understood it as an omen for negative things happening to heads of state, because you have the two luminaries who are being
Mhm.
blotted out, the two luminaries of the sky. And so, but eclipses happen. It is an empirical thing that you can observe. It is, and you
Mhm.
have evidence to know, like, nobody's imagining that. It's not like one person is yelling in the town square and it's like they're crazy. You can see that that's happening. And so it's really about it's empiricism meets myth making.
Mhm.
And you say, like, okay, if I'm looking up, like, if you don't have a scientific worldview, or like if you are not measuring the fact that the sun is a star made of helio, whatever it is. I'm not a planetary scientist, so I don't know like the chemical makeup. But if you're observing the moon and the sun in the sky, and you don't have the tools to tell you exactly that that's a star, the moon is a giant rock, whatever, you see these two major lights in the sky that illuminate the night and illuminate the day, and they are the life force. So then you're going to compare that to the worldview that you have, which is, I live beneath the rule of a head of state. So
Mhm.
obviously, like, the sun means the pharaoh, the sun means the king. And so when the sun is blotted out, does that mean that there's going to be some like crazy mutiny? Does that mean that there's going to be a war kind of thing? Um, and so, yeah, it's empiricism meets um, the archetypes, meets the human creative spirit, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm. So why do you think astrology is kind of having another moment in the last decade?
Um, I think that there's, I think that people maybe are a bit disenchanted with the cult of scientism, and I
Mhm.
think that people feel I think it's very human to have a creative impulse and a creative drive to want to tell stories. And we are coming out of a time, coming out of several decades of disbelief in Christianity, monotheism. I think that had a really strong, tight grip over humanity for the last couple hundred years, or the last couple thousand years, and the over secularization. People are disenchanted with that. I just think that it comes down to that. People are feeling devoid of creativity. They're feeling devoid of observing synchronicities. Something that has really captured my imagination recently is Carl Jung's writing on synchronicity. After he coined that term, and after he incorporated observing synchronicity in his work, he started studying astrology. And in the last couple decades of his life, he would analyze patients' natal charts, and he would incorporate astrology into the practice. And so I think that that's a big. I think that that's just a big part of it too, is that starting with that New Age time in the middle of the 20th century, people start realizing that there's a mysteriousness, there's something interesting and profound going on in the universe that we still can't get at. And I think that we're at a point where, science is never going to stop making discoveries, but we're at a point where, we've observed reality to the very minuscule, to atoms, and then we figured out how to split an atom, and that is like that's like horrifying, existentially horrifying, because you've gotten down to the very smallest part, and there's still things that you don't understand. And so I think and so, like, at the end of the day, all you have left is this like creative drive and a creative impulse, imaginative impulse, to sort of create myths for yourself. And you realize that is like studying reality down to atomic bits is only going to take you so far. It's not going to fulfill you. And human storytelling is probably is what is fulfilling. So I think that in broad strokes, that's what's happening. And then like insane astrologers, like scammy people on the internet. Scammers are going to exist no matter what worldview you have.
I suppose you sort of touched on the metaphysics of science there, which is that everything's reducible to material because that's all that there is. I don't know. I understand that the archetypal nature of astrology, the archetypal sort of underpinnings of astrology, are used to kind of fill the gaps where there is a why there. I don't know. Does that kind of summarize the metaphysics of astrology, or is there kind of more to it than that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, it's so crazy.
This is me being not very useful, because as a philosopher, I want to get into like the metaphysics. Like, what is the if I ask you enough whys, like, what is the assertion at the base of what you're studying, basically?
Yeah. Well, it definitely is. Like, I'm trying to think about some examples that I can put forward here that are like examples of myth from the myths. But to me, like, it is so tied to empiricism, and I guess it's just like it's more, I guess, the metaphysics. It's less about asking why, and it's more about just like let's observe what's happening, and then it's just like if you think about it's just like boring if you just like are observing the world, and then you just say like, okay, and then you just define the world. Like, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's sort of like if you look at the world and you have evidence for something, and you're like, okay, Saturn is the 6th planet from in our solar system. That's just like boring. So let's figure out why it's the 6th planet. Let's do some like numerology, or let's understand the metaphysics of the number 6 kind of thing. And I think that, I think it's just inserting human creativity into it is like what is the metaphysics of it, I guess.
Because I think the drive of science, and then in its vulgar form, scientism, comes from that search for the place where cause and effect actually happens. And I think that, in contrast to astrology, science tends to, like, when something happens, it wants to paper over the part we can't see, because we'll never actually find the cause and effect, the direct cause and effect. It papers over that with an assumption of contiguous natural law. Like, so it establishes those laws, and it feels like that's a very analytical way of looking at the world. Like you said, it's like, this planet is the sixth from the sun and all this sort of stuff. Or, if you drop something from this height, it will reach this terminal velocity, and those are all the natural laws being defined. But it feels like astrology is more focused on the strange sort of dogmatisms and story-based way in which humans view the world, instead of trying to understand it from a god's eye view, if that makes sense. Like a material god almost is strange.
And yeah, a material god, it is right. And it's sort of like, I would imagine someone from antiquity, observing gravity, and this is completely hypothetical and just made up in my mind. This isn't like rooted in any sort of practice, but I can imagine someone in antiquity observing gravity and saying like, okay, if I drop an object from this height and it falls at X speed, and then I go higher and it falls even further, I can imagine someone being like, oh, there was something about the object being enraged, and so therefore like it made its journey, it like picked up speed, kind of thing. And so it's like, it's just a way of putting the poetic into reality. I think that's it. But then what ends up happening, are really strange synchronicities. So like Saturn being the sixth planet, and Saturn became associated with the number 6. It became associated with the Devil tarot card, because the Devil tarot card is 15, and 1 and 5 is 6, and so it gets real conspiracy theory brained. And that numerology can get like crazy in that way. But Saturn becomes associated with 6. It becomes associated with the devil, all these things. And then when we have telescopes, and we also have space ships that can travel and then relay their photographs back to us, the North Pole of Saturn is a hexagon. And so it's like
wait, what? Can you just rewind a little bit there?
Yeah.
That's a big thing I did not know.
Yeah.
So Saturn's a gas planet, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you say the pole is a hexagon, what do you mean by that?
It kind of resembles the red spot on Jupiter in terms of a storm, but it has a hexagonal shape. It has 6 sides.
Okay.
And so it's like you can
every day, I guess. Do we know the reason for that, or is it like?
I'm sure that NASA has a reason. I'm sure that there's some way that the like winds of the atmosphere, I don't know, but I haven't looked into it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, but again, it's like there definitely is a reason, and there's definitely an empirical and scientific way of explaining the hexagonal axis, the hexagonal pole. But the metaphysical or the mystical is the fact that it is that like, because the ancient astrologers saw that it was counted that it was the 6th planet, and then associated it with 6, and then it had these associations rolled up into it, and then it's revealed that it has a hexagonal pole. It's crazy. And so it's just like I guess it's about paying attention to that synchronicity.
Yeah, I suppose that's where I think the gap is between science and astrology, because when you would say synchronicity, a scientist would say coincidence. So can you explain synchronicity, or is it literally, is it a coincidence? Like, I don't know.
I think a coincidence is, as you say, that sort of like covering up of things that we can't explain. And so coincidence is just like the label of that it just happened to be that way. And a lot of people will say there are still people who think that like it's a coincidence that the pyramids align with Sirius, or that the Sphinx's face aligns with the zodiac constellation of Leo.
Or all the stuff with Stonehenge, right, as well.
Yeah. People, I mean, and that's like pretty much debunked now. Like the idea that was people are a majority of the world is on board with the fact that megaliths were like calendars basically and timekeeping structures. But there are people who are like, oh, you can't, like, it's just, there are certain things about the pyramids, the measurements of the pyramids and how the measurements match up with like the radius of the earth. And people will be like, that's a coincidence. And it's like, I don't, anyway, it's like, just because you can't explain, like, whatever, I won't go on a tirade, but they can't necessarily explain, they don't have empirical historical evidence to explain why or how those calculations were made. We don't have evidence of how the pyramids were constructed and what went into constructing them. And so therefore they'll just say it's a coincidence because you just can't explain it. And so that is sort of a label. Whereas a synchronicity, Carl Jung thought that the more that you pay attention to synchronicities, the more that they appear to you. And he has many accounts of this with like clients where he would like point out synchronicities to them, and once they became aware of it, then they were a lot of things were sort of like happening in like their reality was becoming this constellation of synchronicities. And so you still can't, the term synchronicity to me is sort of like, you still can't explain it. It's something that's happening at the it is coincidental, but you're more the feeling is that you're more open to it, you're more open to observing it, and so therefore it's going to be more of that mysteriousness of the world, more of the metaphysical world, I guess, will open itself up to you when you are paying attention to that.
I don't think that's controversial at all, because I think that lines up with what we know from biology and psychology, because there is so much going on around us, and our nervous system and our senses are like, they're in a storm of impressions, right? And we have to, like, I'm completely focused on the screen right now and what's going on, but if I was to pay attention to other things, I would notice smaller things, right? I mean, you might have seen the experiment where they show the subjects a video of people passing a ball around, and they ask them to count how many times they passed the ball. But then in the background, there's like a gorilla, and they ask them, did they see the gorilla? And no one sees the gorilla. I feel like it's almost the same with the synchronicities, like as soon as you start thinking about these things, you're going to notice them everywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's, I guess, the attempt, and it's the same with coincidences. They'll just like sort of happen in the background if you're not paying attention to them. And I guess with synchronicity, it's sort of like the attitude that you bring to it, and the sort of narrative that you're gonna bring to it. And there's also a decision. I think that when people use the term synchronicity colloquially, like they sort of think that it's an invitation to keep looking into that. It's an invitation to narrativize that, and to like to create a progressive narrative story out of it. Is another thing, and to sort of like follow the thread. A lot of very like woo-woo spiritualists too will say, like, you want to follow the synchronicities so that then like your manifestations like start materializing. And yeah, that's pretty interesting too. Have you read The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot?
No, I haven't.
I do recommend it. It's very it's really, really good. He is doing each chapter is a different sort of case study where he's trying to prove the holographic universe theory. And yeah, it's pretty good.
It's going to go on my ever expanding reading list.
I know.
In my entire life, but yes,
I know.
Maybe I'll get back to you in a few decades on that one. I'm going to say something that is kind of anecdotal, but it might get me in trouble. But why is astrology so appealing to women?
Oh yeah, I think that I think that there's a lot. That's like a loaded question and a loaded answer. But I think that there's this might be like very Nietzschean, I don't know, but there's like this sort of in tune with nature, in tune with like the wildness of nature that is very feminine.
Yeah.
And the feminine wants to be like in vibration, in a vibrational relationship with everything like happening externally. And I think that the poetics of astrology um gets at that. I think that the feminine urge is to explore the synchronicities, is to explore the mystery, and just sort of have an inclination toward like, oh, there's something that's like unexplainable, and we can let it remain unexplainable, and still like explore it. Whereas I think that it's more masculine to want to want to reduce reality down, to keep
Right.
like
Yeah.
to keep going and to keep progressing into like what's the reasoning, like the very logical. And I think that it's just it comes down to, yeah, like masculine feminine brains, like it's a masculine urge to sort of like meticulously explain away everything and just go through a logical process. And a feminine brain is more like, or they're just the feminine, is less concerned with logic and more concerned with the with the beauty and the vibration and the poetics. I think
Yeah.
that that's yeah.
I'm really glad you brought up Nietzsche there, because that kind of helps me understand it a bit better as someone who's quite well versed on Nietzsche.
Mm.
So I guess the female brain, with what we're saying, maybe it's more Dionysian. It's got a greater respect for emotive sort of ways of knowing, and the male brain, maybe it's more Apollonian, generally speaking. So the female brain wants to explore, and the male brain would want to explain.
Yeah.
Although I shouldn't say male, female, male. I think what's fair to say is masculine and feminine, because they
Mhm.
do obviously vary.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, totally. And the Apollonian Dionysian axis is definitely how I would, yeah, that's how I would put it too.
mhm, mhm.
Um, yeah.
You said a word there that I've heard a lot in a lot of hokey contexts. You said vibrational.
Oh yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
Vibrational is just sort of like, well, everything is ever, and this also goes back to holographic universe theory. It also goes back to like Nikola Tesla. Um, e- everything everything is vibrating, everything has a resonance. I mean, there,
Mhm.
like, that's like the whole that's inherent in energy, which is what makes our entire reality.
Yeah.
And so there, the way that I sort of like visualize it, the way that I would describe it is like there's these sort of registers of vibrations. If the entire reality is made up of energy, and then you have like matter, which is very slow moving, slow
Mhm.
vibration, slowly vibrating energy, and then you have something like light or sound that is vibrating at a higher frequency, like you having a brain and like, I mean, having like a brain or having a soul, I don't know if I necessarily like separate those two in my worldview, but like you can occupy the different registers
Mhm.
of vibration. And so like people, yeah, in sort of new agey woo woo discourse circles, it's sort of like you need to vibrate higher, and you need to uh like be like, that's a low vibe. I mean, that's, yeah, yeah, the whole concept of vibes, it comes from that too. um but I think that for me, yeah, it's sort of like there are um you can occupy different resonances, and you
Mhm.
do like you can choose to tap into a certain like vibration that maybe seems higher than you, or a different texture than you. um and I think that when you're tapping into like synchronicity, and you're not attempting to explain the synchronicity away, or you're not attempting to just like ignore it, then you're also tapping into a different register of vibrations, vibrational frequency. Um, Something that's also interesting, but well, okay. Before I get into that thought, I'll just finish this other thought too. Is that like Nikola Tesla also has like some really deranged writing about like crystals and
Mhm.
energy and vibration.
Who doesn't?
Super,
Anyone who's ever written anything
yeah.
has some stuff they're not so proud of. I understand.
But well, but I think that I think that he was very proud of it. I think that it's just like, yeah, but it comes off as deranged just because we have like we have the contrasting, very Apollonian other kind of scientific writings. But anyway, but Nikola Tesla, yeah, also talks about like vibrations, and like he gets into like those crazy diagrams about like what is vibrating that is outside of your the five senses that you can perceive. It's just like it's great. It is deranged, but it's also great. But the other thing that the other thought that I was going to go on though is something that was really interesting to me that I had no idea that it was so mystical was Napoleon Hill. Are you familiar with Think and Grow Rich? Napoleon Hill was writing in the 50s. I can't remember. He was writing in the middle of the 20th century, and he's like known as the first self-help author. And he wrote Think and Grow Rich, which is like 11 chapters about how to change your mindset and how to make money. And when most of his it's pretty based. Most of his uh, uh, chapters are about these people like the robber barons of the late 19th century, and like Carnegie Mellon or Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie, how he like made his huge fortune, the Rockefellers, the steel tycoons, whatever. And his whole thing is like he's done several interviews with these people, and he's like it's about the mindset. And so I read Think and Grow Rich because it's like an iconic. Yeah, exactly. I did want to be rich. And it's an iconic self-help book too, and it's just interesting, but it's so mystical because he talks about manifestation throughout. He talks about how to manifest, how to change your mind, or change your mindset, and how your mindset is going to project your own reality. And I was like, oh, and that it's interesting in the context of your question about like astrology being feminine, because Napoleon Hill, again, it's like very based, and it's like it very much seems like, oh, this is how like I'm a dude and I need to like make lots of money, whatever.
Right.
But then he's so focused on the manifestation, and he like I think it's the final chapter in the book is like about how to just like say your affirmations and how to like project your own reality. And I think that he was just like tapped into something too. I think that he was choosing to go down a path of like, okay, I'm actually going to explore something that is mysterious. And it's a really interesting contrast of like him having these case studies of people who've made lots of money, and he's like, here's what they did. Here's how they like took opportunities. Here's how they masterminded their way into success. But then it's contrasted with like, and also you need to be saying your affirmations every morning into the mirror kind of thing.
Right. No, it's interesting because I think that that's the issue where, I was caveating myself by saying, oh, I mean masculine and feminine as opposed to male and female. But
Yeah.
there's the whole interplay between those two things is that you can take something that's quite feminine, quite investigative, and take a Apollonian approach to that thing. You can take an Apollonian thing and take a Dionysic approach to that. I don't think it's so like cut and dry. And I think, usually someone who's in tune with things that are actually going on or is successful in some way has a mixture of both.
I think that is would that be like a Hegelian perspective, because like it's like the synthesis.
That's something that we should bring up because it's interesting. Lots of the astrology stuff definitely is a cyclical version of time, and the Hegelian stuff is way more linear. I'm not read on Hegel. I know a lot about it through osmosis again, but just before we get to that, I want to rewind a little bit because when this is probably like super obvious to somebody who's not had it explained to them before. But when you were talking about the definition of like vibrational, I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, it's almost to me, if I was to describe some people, it's like, it feels like people have different vibrations, like different people have different vibrations. And then I was thinking about the etymology, and you said that something has a certain vibe, like it's the same like root word. Like I don't know, I found that kind of weird there. That's a synchronicity I've noticed. There you go.
yeah, totally. And it's and people. I mean, I think everybody can agree that vibes are real. Vibes are real, and yeah, people occupy. I think that's also maybe a good way to look at it and sort of like explain it, or think a good way of framing it and thinking about it is that you encounter different vibrations every time you encounter a different person, and And that is sort of like the easiest, most tangible way to experience these different registers of vibrations, is just by like encountering other people, and like people who have zero chill like occupy, you know, whatever crazy energy level, and then someone who's very grounded and chill occupies like sort of a lower vibration. That is also like where uh and you can map that onto zodiacal archetypes too. You know, people will say like, oh, someone like a Taurus, someone who's a Taurus is an earth sign, and so they're extremely chill, they're extremely grounded and all this stuff. And whereas someone who's a Gemini is like operating at the highest frequency, like constantly talking and whatever. So yeah, you know, I think that it's just, yeah, that's our peak into vibrational frequencies.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, right, you could take the same sort of scenarios and say, oh, you know, that person's very high strung because they've got a lot of cortisol going around in their body.
Right.
But from like a perspective that actually makes sense for human meaning and kind of a practical sense for us to communicate with each other, the vibrational stuff is kind of more useful. It's a way of us contextualizing it. Is it kind
Yeah.
of like more useful in a narrative sense than, you know, the blank empirical facts are?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And just a little bit more aesthetic. And the other thing too is that everything has been so the way that our education system is set up is so like separated and disparate. And so like people are not going to have the same lexicon as someone who's studying like human biorhythms and like circadian rhythms. And so it's just like for someone to say like, oh, you have a lot of cortisol going pumping through your veins right now, but to someone who is not super versed in that is just going to be like, what does that mean? So
Mm.
yeah.
So when is this age of Aquarius kicking off then?
It's here. um, so Age of Aquarius, yeah, that's my whole shtick. Uh, and my whole like project at this point, at this moment. Um, Astrological ages, there's something that's a pretty big concept in greater occultism and astrology, but it's rooted in actual planetary science. So it's something called, the earth goes through something called axial precession, where you can think of it like a gyroscope, where the earth is like a spinning top, but then a gyroscope is a spinning top that has a horizontally rotating circle, and then it has a vertical spinning circle. And the vertical spinning circle is a year, 365 days that the earth rotates around an axis, but then it actually spins the horizontal part of the gyroscope, the top actually spins around, makes a rotation, and that takes 26,000 years roughly. And so in occultism and ancient astrology, um, well, there's some controversy saying that it's associated with astrology, but it is. But they've divided that up. The astrologers divided up the 26,000 years according to the 30-degree 12 zodiac signs. And so and it has to do with where what constellation is rising on the horizon during the spring equinox, and the in the Earth's rotation axial precession, it occupies one zodiac sign for about 2,000 years, or 2,000 to 2,500 years. And those are known, those 2,000-year periods, chunks of time, are the astrological ages. So we have been in the age of Pisces since the birth of Christ in 0 AD. So it's been about 2,000 years. That was also part of this 1960s New Age Renaissance, is when astrologers and New Age people were studying occultism. They realized, oh, it's been 2,000 years, so now we're at the dawning of the age of Aquarius, kind of thing. And so, you know, if you want to be really rudimentary about it, the new millennium was the start of the age of Aquarius. There's some other calculations that are, and this is like a little bit, I'm not super, there are many different types of measurements and calculations. People have been studying like very ancient, like Egyptian and Turkish, Sumerian megaliths to sort of come to these conclusions, come to these calculations. But a lot of people agree that the year 2140 is when we're going to be like fully instantiated, like the age of Aquarius is here in the year 2140. So yeah, roughly now between now and then 2140.
So it sounds a lot like we're going to miss. We're going to be here for the transitional time, and we're going to miss the actual age.
Yeah, which is important because the transitional time is when the thing about my project. I'm a part of a collective called the Aquarian Conspiracy, which is about Bitcoin and the age of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
And Bitcoin is like extremely emblematic of the age of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
It's emblematic of Aquarius, the zodiac sign. Also in Bitcoin's natal chart, the North Node, which is a geometric point on the ecliptic.
That's something I never even thought of, is because Bitcoin has a birth date.
Yeah.
It also has. Oh my god, I never even thought of that. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. Yeah.
So what's Bitcoin's star sign?
The sun sign is a Capricorn.
Oh, Bitcoin is so Capricorn.
Yeah, it's a very stabilizing force in the world. It really,
Right,
truly is.
Trust, right?
Yeah. But even more interesting than, and this could get really wingnut. But Ethereum also has a birth date. Ethereum also has a natal chart,
Mm-hmm.
and the synastry of the two is like insane. Like they are opposed. Like everything about Bitcoin and Ethereum is like this oppositional force. It's like it's uncanny to look at that shit. But anyway, but there's another point in everybody's natal chart and everything's natal chart. It's called the North Node, which is a geometric point on the ecliptic. That is the point where the eclipses happen each year. And again, because eclipses were seen as these like fated, horrifying events, where like destiny for a civilization would be fulfilled or decided. The North Node is understood as your life's purpose, and so Bitcoin's North Node is in Aquarius. So that's another thing about that. But going back to this original question, we're in the transition, and that is really important because through every astrological age, and archaeology is actually catching up to this a little bit, I think, because you can see, again, like I mentioned earlier, the Sphinx is facing the constellation of Leo, and the pyramids and the ancient Egyptian megaliths and these huge structures were being built during the age of Leo. And there's also Göbekli Tepe, which is in Turkey, has these like bas relief carvings in the rock structures that are associated with bulls and like this like worship of bulls. And that's the age of Taurus. Taurus is the sign of the bull. It was being built in the age of Taurus. So what you see is like these huge ancient structures that are all facing and it cannot be, you can't just tell me that the Sphinx is facing Leo purely by coincidence, but these structures that are facing or venerating these astrological signs, they're being built again for those civilizations to broadcast to the future where, like what point in time where they were. Those civilizations want to broadcast to the future where they were during the axial precession. They want to record their time. They want to make it known we were a civilization, we were living in this astrological age. And so that's really important when you're at this transitional phase, to say like, okay, we're here at this transition between the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. So we are going to miss the age of Aquarius when it's fully here, but what are we going to do to broadcast to keep the time, to time keep, I guess.
I want to come back to the Bitcoin stuff and kind of what we do as people as the transition, but just to rewind a little bit, is the fact that the birth of Christ lines up with the rising of the age of Pisces. I mean, it's quite easy to say that's a just so story because it's based on, we're on the Roman calendar, right? So does it kind of vibe, if you will, with other calendars, or is it just like an Occidental thing that we've sort of projected?
The calendar stuff is like a whole other conspiracy that can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. I call myself a Gregorian calendar truther because
Okay.
because the Gregorian calendar is like such a psyop. But um,
I love
yeah,
being like most people, if you're like a conspiracy theorist for like 9/11 or whatever, people know what that is and they roll their eyes. But if you sound like a Gregorian calendar truther, people are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
yeah, yeah. Um, oh man, yeah. So the Julian count. I'll start off. I'll just like try to briefly explain that the Julian calendar observes the axial precession. Basically, like with the Julian calendar, the spring equinox moves backwards in time when you're observing time that way, and again, that is something that like materially determines, the Julian calendar materially tells you what astrological age you're in because during the age of Taurus, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere was happening on April 20th. And now that was the age of Aries, I guess. The age of Taurus, the spring equinox would have been May 20th. But and now our equinox is happening on March 20th. And the whole thing, I mean, this is clearly documented when you read about why the Gregorian calendar was put into place in the 1580s, is because and why they added the whole concept of the leap year. And like there's a precise number. I think the Julian calendar is like 365.2 days, and then the Gregorian calendar is 365.4 or whatever. But it's clearly documented that they have the leap year in there. They add the extra day, whatever, every 4 years, so that, and this is explicit, so that the spring equinox falls on March 20th to 21st every year. Like they're very explicit, and they're saying, the Gregorian calendar is saying, we want the spring equinox to be fixed. But and this is where it gets wingnut and deranged for me, is like, but that was instituted by the Vatican. It was Pope Gregory. It was the Vatican who is interested in extending the age of Pisces. Like they are material, because the entire Catholic Church, Christianity, is the age of Pisces. Christianity wants the age of Pisces to be forever fixed because they want to maintain that power. And so and they're basically saying that with the Gregorian calendar. They're saying, we want the spring equinox to be at a fixed point. And everybody just like accepts it. Like when you talk to mathematicians and stuff who are just like totally on board with the Gregorian calendar, they're like, well, yeah, but we'd like, our spring equinox would like move backwards. That'd be too crazy. And it's like, it's not crazy. That's how human civilizations have lived for millennia.
Yeah.
And
the mathematicians and scientists relying on the authority of the church to tell them how to keep time as well.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And when you think about, I think it took about like 200 years for the whole globe to be on the Gregorian calendar. And in the 18th century, there were straight up riots when it came time for, in Northern Europe, when it came time for people to be like, okay, like we're going to be on this calendar. And it was the farmers. It was the people who like work with the land and rely on the cycles of the sun and the growing cycles. I mean, they were rioting against adopting the Gregorian calendar. I think that the Gregorian calendar is like this very, I mean, you can say that like for the age of Pisces, the whole concept of Christianity and monotheism is like the sort of mega structure that we attach to that age, to that astrological age. But I really think that it's the Gregorian calendar is like the thing that civilization wanted to broadcast the age of Pisces, is like is that inserting an extra day every 4 years and maintaining the spring equinox on March 20th is like their sort of broadcast tool. But that's just going to create, it just creates confusion around the seasons, around seasonal changes. It creates a lot of climate hysteria, because I mean the climate is going to change. Like when the earth goes through its axial precession, obviously the climate does change, yes, but if you're not observing it properly with a proper calendar, then it's going to seem more catastrophic than it actually is. And that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, and so the other thing though too that's like interesting about like Jesus Christ as a historical figure and understanding that the age of Pisces started with that birth is like there was also something astrological import happening at that time. It was a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. And that was like the star that the Magi in the Bible were sort of chasing. And that conjunction actually happened in December of 2020. Again, Saturn Jupiter started a whole new cycle. They initiated a cycle in the sign of Aquarius, which is initiating a cycle of air. And that's like significant for a number of reasons. It's like it's a lot to try to explain, but it's significant. The Jupiter Saturn conjunction in ancient astrology, Hellenistic astrology, those were the two farthest planets out. And so their conjunctions initiate a world cycle. And they were conjoined during at the birth of Christ. And like the Bible is documenting that. The Bible is documenting astrologers looking for that. And yeah, and then you have this like historical figure of this person who is rising up against Judaism and yeah, and then he has his 12 apostles, which is the zodiac, and yeah, there's all sorts of ways the history of the Bible and the myth that is the Bible intersects with astrology. That tells, there's many clues in the Bible that tell you that it was a transition into the age of Pisces.
Yeah, I think that Christianity has a big investment in linear time, particularly because of the telos of Christianity, which is basically you're waiting for the resurrection, pretty much.
Yeah.
Seems like all this astrological thinking has a more cyclical view of time. I mean, you've already talked about how the star alignments have come back around for this 2,000 years. I do want to move on and talk about what you think about the connection between Bitcoin and astrology. Can you kind of walk us through what you think the connection is?
Yeah. So, well, first, I guess it starts with Bitcoin's natal chart and just like the crazy synchronicities there. There's an article written in 2019, I think, or 2020 about this. If you align Bitcoin's natal sun with the United States natal sun, they are exactly by degree opposing each other. It's crazy. And then if you align the United States,
just to interrupt, this is for mine and someone who's in a similar boat to mine's understanding. When you say natal chart, obviously that's whatever star sign that thing is aligned with by virtue of its birth. But when you say things are opposed, what do you mean exactly when you say opposed?
So everything that has a natal chart, the natal chart is a map of the sky from the perspective of Earth at the time that something is born. So it's all planets, takes all planets into account. And when something is opposed, it's mapped onto the zodiacal wheel, the 12 30-degree sections of the constellations. So when two things are opposed, what we're looking at is the natal chart of the United States overlaid with the natal chart of Bitcoin. And so the United States was born on July 4th, or that's the accepted natal chart is July 4th, 1776. And so the United States sun and its sun sign was at 13 degrees Cancer. When you overlay that with Capricorn's natal chart, which was born January 3rd, 2009, Bitcoin's sun was at 13 degrees Capricorn. And so those are exactly opposite of each other on the zodiacal wheel. They are 180 degrees apart from each other. And so that's what I mean when I say opposed. And there are different aspects is what it's called when you're measuring aspects of the planets. You're measuring the geometric relationship between planets. And so within someone like an individual birth chart, you can measure aspects. You can say like, Bitcoin's north node in Aquarius is directly opposed to its ascendant degree of 8 degrees Leo. And so you say that these 2 points on its chart are 180 degrees apart. Or you can say like Bitcoin's moon is at 4 degrees Aries. And so that's making what's called a square to its sun, which means that they're 90 degrees apart. So they're making a 90-degree square angle. So yeah, you're measuring the geometric relationships between the planets. And so you can do that with in an individual chart, you can also do that when you're looking at multiple charts overlaid on top of each other and seeing what the relationships are. And so to bring it back to the United States and Bitcoin, when they're opposed, an oppositional aspect is a really sticky, like rough aspect, because it's very polarizing. It's very like contentious.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that is like really notable that they're exactly by degree opposing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you overlay the US dollar natal chart, the US, I think it was in April, is like when in 1820 something, when the US dollar was like birthed. And that's at 13 degrees Aries, which is making a 90-degree angle both to the United States sun and to Bitcoin sun. And so it's a square, and a square is another aspect that is very, like, you can think of it like squaring off. It's very like heads butting, very, very conflict prone. And then when you put all of these three charts on top of the Chinese yuan natal chart, the Chinese yuan was born in October, and it's at 13 degrees Libra, which is exactly opposed to the US dollar. Libra is opposite of Aries. And so it creates this cross. It's called a grand cardinal cross. They're all
in the age of Pisces, another bit of
crossing into crossroads. I mean, basically like this major crossroads. And it's like, yeah, this was in an article written by an astrologer, Matthew Swan, who is an excellent astrologer. And he called it the Aquarian technocalypse, Bitcoin and the Aquarian technocalypse. And he overlays these charts, and it's like, it's crazy that they're at these, it's too, I don't know, it's too crazy. So that was something that, like, was the initial, for me, at least personally, was the initial, like, oh, there's something astrological going on. There are signatures in Bitcoin's natal chart that are intersecting with all of these other geopolitical natal charts. And so that's something to notice. But then you look at other astrological signatures, as I mentioned, the North Node in Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign, the archetype of Aquarius is a sign of networks, communities, decentralization, technology. And for Bitcoin's true node to be in that sign and to like embody that as its purpose is really significant. Because it is like the decentralization tool, and it is the stabilizing force that is pretty clearly, I mean, my opinion and the opinion of many others is like very clearly like the stabilizing force, the solution to ever increasing currency debasement that is just wreaking havoc on the world.
Yeah, that's really, so I hope I get my history right on this, but I'd be really interested to, on top of that, work out what the alignments were of the introduction of the Bretton Woods system, which is pegging all the world's companies to the US dollar, and then the getting rid of the gold standard as well. I'd be interested to see where those are.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I need to look at that. I need to look that up, because I haven't looked at the chart for Bretton Woods or for getting off the gold standard.
I think I've mixed those up, but I don't know which. There's a name for both of them, but I can't really remember.
Yeah, I can't remember the one for the 1971, but it is right. The Bretton Woods, right after World War II, right? Or was it in between the World Wars?
I hope so, or else someone's going to be in the comments telling me I'm wrong again.
But I haven't looked at those charts. That's an excellent, I'm going to make a note to do that.
Cool. So, we're saying like 2100 or past that for the age of Aquarius, but people in the said 2000 for like Y2K or something else in the 20th century. Is this astrological thinking, is it kind of infected by our presentism, thinking that we're always on the verge of the next thing? Because it does, like you've already mentioned, like climate alarmism, right? Like you can just find dozens and dozens of predictions of people saying, oh, in the year 2000, oh, then it becomes the year 2010, and all with religious predictions.
Yeah.
The date Christ can rise. Oh wait, no, sorry, it's next decade. I got it wrong or something like that.
Well, and it's interesting. I wonder if it's presentism, or I wonder if it's just like teleoism or something, like eschatologism, and just like this very preoccupied worldview of or a frame of thinking that is just too preoccupied with the end of the world, apocalypse, and accelerationism kind of thing. And in some ways, like I think that there are generations, like you think about the 1950s, and people who, like, the sort of attitude was like, this is great. Like, we are out of the world wars, especially people in America were like, we are the world superpower. We are victorious. We ended the Second World War kind of thing. And those people, I don't know if they were necessarily like, they felt like they were on the verge of something, like on the verge of something really great, but they didn't think that it was the end of the world necessarily.
Mhm.
And then you go into like the early 70s, and America was engaged in like the Vietnam War and stuff. And like 20 years later, people are like, oh shit, now we're on the edge of something.
Mhm.
The verge of the end of the world. And so I think that people feel like they're on the verge of something, but like the sort of vibe it changes with
Mhm.
every 20 years or so. That's also a part of a theory that was put forward in The Fourth Turning, this book by
Mhm.
Strauss and Howe, and William Strauss and Neil Howe, that like humans live through these cycles, of these seasonal cycles that are bigger than the actual seasons of the earth, but like every 20 years or so, people are cycling through, feeling like they're in a crisis, feeling like they're in an awakening, or
Right.
feeling like they're in like a summertime like high kind of thing. And
Mhm.
so yeah, when it comes to the age of Aquarius, though, like I think that people I think that we've been in astrological age terms, we've been in this time of like, oh, something like this is a deep transition moment that we're in. Like things are really gonna like not look the same.
Mhm. Yeah, I think presentism is quite natural because, as you know, embodied subjects, the present is how we experience time and space. But I'm kind of borrowing something from Julius Evola, who's a bit of a spicy
Mm.
philosopher, but he does
Yeah,
have astrological thinking.
yeah.
Is that he talks about the Kali Yuga, is what he calls it, that sort of transition. I think that's his transitional time. But regardless,
Mhm.
he does mention, and this kind of made me understand it a bit better, is that there are actually cycles within cycles as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's not just,
Yeah.
there's a summer and then there's a spring, and but within the winter, for example, which we might be in right now, within this there is mini cycles of, we might just be in this, like, the summer of that mini cycle where Bitcoin becomes a thing. I don't know.
Right, right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that there are people, well, I know that there are people out there who describe Bitcoin as like the summer of winter.
Mhm,
And
yeah.
like and then Bitcoin's coalescing is going to be like the spring of springs kind of thing.
Mhm,
Um and yeah, it gets super, that whole like cycles within cycles gets so incredible, because then the wheel doesn't, it's not a flat wheel, it's a spiraling like conch shell.
right. Mhm,
um and it's I love that. It's super interesting. Something that I want to mention too, that is like, again, one of these like coincidences, synchronicities that's like crazy, is like prior to Bitcoin coming onto the scene in 2009, um astrologers had pegged 2140 as the year that the age of Aquarius was going to be fully coalesced. 2140 has been an astrological age of Aquarius year for a while, for
mhm,
several decades. And the way that, oh God, this is just like, it trips me up so much. The way that Bitcoin was uh, coded, programmed, there's something called a halving. There are these halving cycles with Bitcoin.
yeah.
Um, all 21 million Bitcoin will be mined by 2140. 2140
Mhm,
is the cutoff year for
right.
the Bitcoin mining to be, like, it will reach its distribution level, or
So
its
wait, do you
maximum.
think that Satoshi might have been an astrologer? Hmm.
Yeah, I do.
Good
I was gonna
theory.
say, I'm not gonna say it, but yeah, I will say it. Like, yes.
It's fine.
There's
I'll say it. I'll say it. But it's an interesting conflation, computer science and astrology. I think that's
yeah.
really strange. So you're an organizer for the Aquarian conspiracy. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Aquarian conspiracy is, first and foremost, we're having a conference happening during Bitcoin Week, Bitcoin Miami.
Mhm.
It's Our event is happening on May 17th, um, at a gallery called Win 317 in Miami, and we're basically just talking about this. I mean, the Bitcoin conference is so it's very industry heavy. And people are talking about like, what products can we build? How can we like incorporate entrepreneurs? How can we incorporate more businesses into Bitcoin and making it an easy, create adoption easier for people, or make adoption easier for people. And we're trying to, there's a lot of momentum with that already. And so the Aquarian conspiracy is sort of like, now's the time to really understand like how Bitcoin is affecting culture, and how Bitcoin and just wanting to talk about like this sort of relationship or dance that Bitcoin has with a greater like cosmological narrative. And it's just sort of like, I think that it's fun for people to think about this kind of stuff, but we also like take it very seriously too, where it's like it's time to actually talk about like the cultural impacts of Bitcoin. It's not, it's very clearly a technological solution, but we want to talk about like the actual implications of that. How is it going to transform society? How we are going to see massive global scale transformations over the next 2 decades. What is that? What does hyper Bitcoinization look like? How do we like weave together this sort of like myth making with Bitcoin? And sort of just like revealing that like synchronous magic with Bitcoin is our event. And so it's a day of, it's a symposium. We have panel discussions lined up talking about calendars, timekeeping, the astrology of Bitcoin, and also talking about, now there's a new protocol on Bitcoin that just came out a couple months ago, called ordinal inscriptions, where it's sort of like an NFT type protocol, but it's more stable than NFTs. You're actually like encoding the data of the media into the blockchain itself. So it's a media storage tool now. And so we're also talking about that in terms of like art in the age of mechanical reproduction kind of thing. Like what are these other implications? So yeah, May 17th. And the Aquarian conspiracy is it's a collective that we just started a few months ago, but we're gonna have like an online internet presence, and like and we want to put out a lot of content for people. We're sort of trying to be a platform or a voice for this deranged theory.
I think the one that Satoshi knows a little bit about astrology sounds like that one has legs to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think
Cool.
so too.
Yeah, so just before we wrap up, there's a question I asked to everyone when I speak to them first time. So if you were on death row, what would be your last meal?
Oh my gosh. I've thought about this. And it's hard to choose. I think first course, I would want something like dumplings, like pork dumplings, just like a nice meat in some carbs. And then maybe like a bone marrow for the main course, something like red meat, like either like just like a simple steak or like a bone marrow, like for the main course. And then dessert, like a strawberry ice cream. Like I just want something carby, something red meat, and something like dairy.
Awesome.
I keep it simple.
Nice. Thanks, Bethany.
Thank you so much for having me.